Hello ratbags, it's Jade with the top 50 survival console games. I do this video pretty much every year. Last year's video hit 900k views nearly, and they've always been popular, but I split this year's video into two, and it seems that didn't actually agree with YouTube as no one's watched it. So I thought I'd put both videos together in one long video. Maybe you can download it, have it playing while you're driving in the car or you're doing something else in the background. Or indeed, maybe you missed the first two parts being shown. So I've shortened some parts as well where I droned on a little bit, and obviously after covering survival games for over 5 years, I've obviously got big opinions about so many because I've played a lot more than you guys have. So do listen and see if any of them are maybe piquing your interest. That's what this video is designed for, to see if you guys want to try some new stuff out. And of course to disagree and argue with me about what is the top 5 or top 10. I tried being a little bit more methodical. I split my actual choices down to a ranking system. Points out of 5 based on survival. How much does the survival mechanics matter in the game? How much of a survival game is it? You'll get up to 5 points. Then I've got 5 points for gameplay. Is it actually good? Does it actually have good story? Lore? Is the systems great? Does it actually have a nice fun vibe? That can get you up to 5 points also. And then the third and final category is support. Basically, how was the game when it launched? Has it got significant issues? Was it abandoned? Does it have a lot of differences between the console and PC versions? Has it got bugs? Has it been given DLC? All them 3 features have gone into my ranking system, so do bear in mind it could be very different compared to PC. So absolutely let me know, agree, disagree, pop your comments down below, but like I said, watch and listen to my reasoning why I've placed them in different spots, some of these games, and let's go. Memories of Mars was meant to be Rust in space, kind of. Unfortunately, it's boring as heck. The planet of Mars is not the one to explore and shoot other players on. It mixes in PvP zones, and you are meant to go and build your bases up, progress, unlock new unlocks and weapons, and ways to get more resources. They took away the vital component though that made me interested in this game, proper PvP. On PC they had it for a year and a bit where you could actually raid other players, but just for the console launch they removed all full PvP servers. Straight after launch they pretty much abandoned this game. Do not touch it, do not go near it unless it's like 2 or 3 quid and you just fancy something a bit different for maybe single player. It's not the world's worst running game, albeit 100 million little bugs, but certainly that lack of updates and the way they abandoned it and changed things up just for launch, this absolutely was a console cash grab. You spent years and millions developing your own game engine, so what do you do if you're Bohemia? You decide to go and use Unreal instead for your next game. VIGOR is a free-to-play, post-apocalyptic kind of battle royale, more along the lines of Escape from Tarkov I guess. You take your loot off map, build up your own little home. I love the setting of this game, I love the looks, the characters, the shooting is absolute dog poo though. One of the worst I've played in a long time. They also have this weird currency where you can buy insurance. You're meant to originally lose all your items. If a player shoots you, you can take them on that map or whatever you've managed to scrounge. But they added insurance that you get to keep percentage of your stuff, basically meaning the risk has been removed, hence why it's such a low placing on my list. If you can handle the janky shooting, you may enjoy it, but not for me. I was one of the first to break the news about Atlas coming out when they accidentally leaked this trailer on the Ark Survival Evolved main YouTube channel. Was it a DLC? Was it its own game? It ended up being its own game, and maybe it should have stayed as paid DLC. Atlas is meant to support 40,000 players in a huge sprawling survival MMO. It barely has about 4,000 playing it at the moment. Even the Xbox launch couldn't really help boost its numbers that much. During its time of development, they left it for 8 months without any significant updates as they switched lead designers. Now they've got some stability. The last 6 or 7 months have been a lot better, adding more content and fleshing out the MMO aspects of it. It's notorious for the way it launched, with multiple delays and all sorts of problems and issues, bugs and stuff that they just didn't test it, and they paid a bunch of top tier streamers to pretty much shit on it because they was expecting Sea of Thieves and it turned out just to be an Ark ripoff. It may eventually come good, but I wouldn't really go near this until you see full release and some decent reviews. Ape, no kill, ape. Alright, don't get salty because I called one of these ape-like creatures an actual ape. I know there's some nerds out there that are going to point it out and say they're not technically apes. Ancestors Humankind Odyssey is a survival game where you go through different evolution stages, learning how to pretty much use weapons and tools for the first time, trying to get away from big anacondas and all sorts of tigers, bears and something else maybe. The game had some interesting ideas, but it's boring and repetitive as hell, learning from mistake, ending up being just a pretty much not enjoyable experience after the first hour or so. If you ever see How to Survive going cheap for a couple of quid, it might be worth picking up just to have a night in with your pals in this co-op survival game. It's filled with blood and gore and over the top weapons and armour pieces as you fight zombie hordes. It's got an interesting vibe to it. There's a zombie apocalypse in London. You need me to do the voiceovers. Why didn't they call me? Zombie is the port of the Wii Zombie U classic from years ago, and it's okay. It's got some nice little features. The main one being that when you die, it's more of a roguelike. You have to actually then go and try and find your zombified corpse and get your loot back. That is one of the more interesting features of Zombie. So yeah, sure, give it a shot if you haven't already picked it up somehow. It only placed so high mainly because it is still a bit of a action story-led game rather than just full out survival. A futuristic yet retro England in the 60s, this is what you get with We Happy Few. It's an interesting concept. It's got 3 main characters with 3 main storylines, and it's got a big component of survival if you choose that game mode. A variety of different ways that you can make it easier or harder, and it does offer a significant challenge for survival fans. There are lots of bugs, there are still lots of issues with it. It's been supported with DLC and updates over its release, but it's still just a bit janky at heart. So yeah, not everyone's cup of tea, but We Happy Few is definitely something you should give a shot. I ain't a snob when it comes to how a game looks. You might consider some games a bit kiddified and they maybe don't deserve to be in the survival genre, but I look at a game like Unturned and I just see maybe some possibilities of something unique and different. And it has got some cool features, like classes, running around maps trying to avoid the affected, as well as players. It is a PvP game where you can get taken out by others. I'm not saying it's a great game, it's got a few bugs and a few issues with it apparently, and the updates for it are already drying up, but it's definitely something you should try if it's a few quid. If you're a true survival fan on console, you've come to expect a good few games that are going to be filled with bugs, problems and issues. Surprisingly, Metal Gear Survive isn't as bad as everyone makes out if you look at it from the point of view of a survival game. Sure, if you're a Metal Gear Solid fan, it's an abomination, but it's actually got a lot going for it in terms of the systems. There's oxygen that you need to explore some of the areas, you need to gather resources, there's zombies of course, and there's all sorts of different ways that you can build up your base or your settlement, and just a variety of different challenges. It hasn't had any updates in nearly 3 years, and the updates pretty much only went out for about 6 months after its release. But there's no doubt about it, there's some meaty systems here, if a little bit buggy and janky gameplay to go with it. But that's survival, right? Wild 8 is another one of them cheap sort of survival games that's very janky, got lots of bugs, but it has got a bit more of a hardcore survival experience, and it's a bit different as well from the usual sort of stuff. Sadly, they took away the big component that made it a hit on PC, which was multiplayer, so it's only single player on console, and like I said, it doesn't look like they've been getting many updates and fixes. This game had controversies with the lead developers leaving pretty much only after a few months of getting it out in early access, and they are now working on that day before game. The publishers took on the rental and got some other people to finish it off, and then suddenly just put it out on console. Cash grab? Maybe. But I would say it's got some solid survival mechanics in it as you fight off wildlife, trying to get resources and stay warm. The survival purists will say it's not a survival game, but Mad Max is, because you've got to take care of your car, you're always on the lookout for more gas and fuel, and of course it's got that post-apocalyptic setting. So yeah, I'm putting it in survival, god damn it. You know what you're going to get. It's a bit of an oldie, but it's an open world RPG action game where the focus isn't on base building but taking care of your car. So yeah, you'll surely see it on Games Pass or cheap in a sale. Why not give it a go if you haven't already? An oldie but a goldie. KONA is a bit of an old one as well, and it relies on you keeping warm as you explore a narrative driven kind of walking simulator kind of mystery survival game. It is pretty light on survival, hence why this game and many others I've only given 1 or 2 points. But it is a fantastic little game, so absolutely go and give it a try. An old one, if you can dig it out, I'm sure you'll find it pretty cheap and something a bit unusual, a bit more interesting. Another survival game that mixes up a little bit of simulation, Sheltered, is an oldie. They've just announced Shelter 2 as coming out very soon, and this is definitely something you should give it a go, particularly if you own it on a portable system. It's very reminiscent of Fallout Shelter as you guide a family, keeping them safe while gathering resources during a post-apocalyptic event. There'll be people trying to take your stuff, and you've got to manage your resources carefully as you guide each family member through their day-to-day, hopefully surviving against all sorts of stuff including bears. The ultimate aim is to build a rocket ship to maybe go and explore other planets. Yeah, I haven't delved too deep into this one, but I did give it a try when it was a game preview years ago on the Xbox. Space Engineers on PC was one of the very first early access style games to go through development. This space voxel simulation building game has now made it to the Xbox with mixed results. On Xbox One, I still believe you can only play with one other player, whereas on an Xbox X and the next series of consoles, you can play with up to 4. There are some limitations also with the building. It really is a struggle getting this game on a console, but it has improved over time. They have been updating it and they've been adding little bits of free expansions as well as paid DLC. So if you want to get to grips with one of the most complex systems, ways that you can build all sorts of contraptions, spaceships, cars, vehicles and bases and automation, and Space Engineers may scratch that itch, and hopefully one day it will appear on the PlayStation 2. I debated long and hard about putting Generation Zero in this list. It's a post-apocalyptic game, it's open world, it has crafting, and you face a deadly army of mechanised robots. But there isn't really many survival other mechanics in it. You can't forage from the natural environment, it's just purely picking up loot from houses and cars. And while they recently added a little bit of horde defense mode, it comes across more like a mission where you have to defend a certain area and you can go ahead and build and spend time in it, but it isn't a fully fledged open world base building experience. If Generation Zero ever implements any of that, and obviously any kind of need for drinking or eating, I think I would put it a bit higher. It had problems at launch, it was accused of being just a bit of an average game, but it definitely has got some highlights. The atmosphere is fantastic, the open world environment is stunning, and yes, it does have a nice little 80s vibe going on for it. Call me in the 90s when you get some more survival mechanics. You'll hear that a lot from me. If games are cheaper, if they're made by smaller teams, I'm much more forgiving of any bugs or issues and problems. But that doesn't necessarily mean you can forgive everything. Open World Country isn't the world's worst game, but it has enough issues at launch that I would say stay away from it just for now. Give it a few months, see if any improvements come, especially for missions and stuff that really stop your progress. Now, progression is a key point of this game as you hunt the wilds of Northern America on different maps, huge maps in fact, as you hunt all sorts of creatures, take up challenges and even do a little bit of fishing. It's got some cool elements to it and a lot more survival than I thought. This is a really tough survival game in fact, much more than you give it credit for. So yeah, I think in a few months this will shoot up my rankings if I did it again. They've got some good moments in this for sure, but yeah, at the moment it's just one of them games that's just a bit too janky and a bit too buggy. Citadel Forged with Fire was kind of just about a survival game. It didn't technically have any food, any water needs, and it's pretty much you just being a Harry Potter character running around the world, taming creatures and using your magic to take on other players. And that's where the survival comes in for me, surviving against other players on PvP. You can play at PvE of course as well, and then you've got all the other mechanics that you associate with these types of games. Building huge massive castles, taming creatures as I mentioned, and conducting and constructing all sorts of different ways to give yourself extra magical spells. It's a shame it took so long to get some content out for it during its launch on PS4 and Xbox, and to be honest it definitely could have done with another maybe 8 or 9 months actually in development. Over the time though, they have added more content to it, they've fleshed out some of the stories and they've added more quests as well as some extra end game to really keep this game going. It's a bit dead on the officials, but again, find it on discount, it might be worth a pluck if you really enjoy games like Ark and Conan. Minecraft versus Art Survival Evolved, and you get PIXARK with all the bugs as well. It had a good idea and I was super excited about the idea of this. I thought it could honestly take over the survival space, but bugs and jankiness and really just not a very good look in certain instances made this game a bit of a slog when it did launch on the Xbox. It's now available on Xbox, PlayStation and Nintendo Switch, and console fans have finally received the Skyward DLC or free expansion that was put out on PC over a year ago. I have put it up high purely because it is such a rip-off of Ark Survival Evolved and Minecraft. This War Mine is another one of them games that mixes together survival with simulation. You pretty much will not be controlling a super soldier, you'll be controlling a group of civilians trying to survive in a besieged city. Lack of food, medicine and lots of danger from snipers and hostile scavengers. It's a definite different take on survival. Available on all consoles and for sure one of the most awarded over its lifetime, especially its DLC. Give it a try if you ever get the chance. Frostpunk is a combination city builder and survival experience, as you have to make key decisions about your colony, your crews, keep them alive, whether or not you're going to deal with infections and how to keep them warm in a post-apocalyptic world that's gone cold. Frostpunk is a simulation game first, foremost, but them survival mechanics are pretty hardcore and it makes for a challenging different take on the survival genre. So give it a try if you like any sort of simulation game and survival. Frostpunk marries them two perfectly. Fade to Silence is a post-apocalyptic third-person game where you actually do a bit of city building as well. You pretty much got a settlement that you can fill with NPCs and decide what kind of buildings you want. That'll help you get more resources. It's a harsh survival game, this one, really difficult, and it takes a bit of a slog to get through the first stages. But once you do, it opens up a bit more, and if you can see past the bugs and the problems, then this game has got some really good stuff in it. There's lots of hunting and there's lots of monsters, Cthulhu-inspired creatures that you're going to have to worry about, as well as horrible storms. And yes, you can pet the doggo. You'll need to, as it will have a sleigh that you can use to travel around the smallish style maps. It's kind of almost like a roguelike in its nature. You can make it a bit easier if you're finding it a bit hard. If you come into any issues or problems though, don't expect any fixes anytime soon. They pretty much only had one update after it launched and that was it. Imagine an indie team made Dark Souls, but then they added more survival mechanics to it, and alright, it wasn't maybe as good graphically. That game's called Outward, and surprisingly, after what I just said, it's pretty okay. It's got split screen, it's got co-op mode, and there's a hell of a lot you can do. There's no technical base building, but latest updates and DLC give you the chance to build your own settlement, and there's a whole bunch of updates that have gone into the game ever since its release. A bit of a cult classic. If you can ignore some of the rough edges around it, this game will offer absolute bundles of story and them survival elements. It's a real different take on the RPG genre and that survival third person genre too. So yeah, I felt this was a bit too janky for me when I first played it, but definitely want to give it another try in the future. If I've had Mad Max, I've got to have Days Gone. Yes, I know you're going to get spaghetti upsetty sometimes looking at some of these games in this list, but you are pretty much doing the same thing, taking care of your bike, going around, gathering resources, crafting, getting upgrades, new weapons, and it's got a lot going for it in that respect. But then chuck in the zombie hordes, and I really do think that lends itself more to survival. Trying to survive against these huge amount of freakers that will just pop out of nowhere. Did I get it right? They're called freakers, yeah? I haven't dipped into it since its launch, but it's had a bunch of stuff added over the time, a brand new survival mode, challenges and lots of updates and fixes. It's just come out on PC as well, so yeah, give it a shot. I think it just about deserves a place in the 50 survival games list. Another game I'm probably going to get a bit of flack for, Genesis Alpha 1, is a bit light on the common survival mechanics, but it has got one of the most important that I really love, which is Horde, or defending yourself. You have to pretty much customize and build your own spaceship, going down to planets, gathering resources, and hopefully making it back in time, while also trying to avoid picking up any nasty unwanted guests. From there, it's about defending your ship, sometimes having to cut off areas and making clones of yourself while mixing in alien DNA. It's got a lot going for it. It is a little bit more of a simulation with that FPS gameplay. A great game, very underrated. Definitely give it a shot if you get a chance. At number 26, we've got Windbound. It wants to be a Studio Ghibli game mixed in with Breath of the Wild, and what you get is a okay experience. It's actually pretty cool going around on the seas, crafting and upgrading your raft. I'll bet it does get a little bit monotonous and boring trying to journey between procedurally generated lands. The game is tough as nails though. There are some pretty hardcore mechanics in it where you have to go back to the start if you die at the beginning, only reaching a very big save point where you'll be able to take your progress forward. So it's almost like a roguelike. It has got easier modes though, or even harder if you like more challenge, and it's definitely something I think you should try at least once. It's a gorgeous looking game, I love the art style. The combat does get a little bit dry and a little bit monotonous, but they've had plenty of updates to hopefully improve that over the last year. Definitely something I've got to try soon and see how much improvement them updates have made, and maybe it'll be even higher next year. Fallout 76 offers RPG world exploration with a huge choice in creatures, biomes and all sorts of base building, weapons, armors and components. It's got a lot going for it when you mention that in the same breath as survival, but it still manages to miss the spot ever so slightly. It is good for Care Bears, but they've nerfed the PvP to high heaven over the last couple of years, and despite its rocky launch, it has improved. I have to give it some credit. What I won't give it any credit for is still the fact it doesn't offer any kind of offline play or single player experience, still making you pay money on a monthly basis to have a semi-server of your own to play with your friends, when as you've seen from this list, so many other games offer that for free. Or at least when they offer servers, they're proper servers and they don't shut down when you leave your server. If you got it on the Xbox on Games Pass, then absolutely I'm sure you've enjoyed it, but for me it's definitely not going to make the top 20. I've probably been a little bit too kind to Last Oasis to include it above some of the games I've already shown off, but there is something about this game that I just really love. I've always loved the motion of these walkers. It's a game that you fight for water, for control of these oases, tile sets, hundreds of servers basically holding hundreds of players, and it's all about large clan warfare. It's got a lot going for it, but it still is in a fluctuating state. Every season they get a new hype, a new bunch of players jump in, but then they do quickly leave. It needs definitely some more work and a little bit more leaning towards a little bit of PvE. But if you do like PvP, you like melee combat, you like thinking, tactical and, as I said, large clan kind of warfare, then I think Last Oasis is definitely worth a punt. The quest for water, the quest for getting resources and at any point being attacked by other players is always going to keep you on edge, but it does offer some solutions that I wish other games would take notice of, like how to combat offline raiding with a great system where you can pack up your base on your walker and fly off to a safe zone. A survival game not for the faint of hearted and definitely a bit of a labour of love. You might want to wait another good 4 or 5 months and see how many updates it's had to see how much it's improved. But I definitely will keep my eyes on this one. I'm hoping I can put it a bit higher and I hope it just doesn't go any lower. There's lots of aspects that make up a survival game, and a big part of it is the crafting and is the creative freedom in base building. Not every survival game has to have it, but if they do, they're generally considered a lot more playable. They've got that sandbox nature. And that's what Dragon Quest Builders 2 has, or maybe even the first one, once you get some pretty lengthy boring tutorials at the beginning. I'm not kidding, it's around 10 hours before you start enjoying a bit more freedom to go and explore and do what you want. They've got a unique setting in the story that you've got different worlds to explore that will give you different resources, and you can then transport a lot of that resources or the ideas and blueprints back to your main island. A cozy one for sure, and definitely geared towards maybe young audience members. With Dragon Quest Builders 3 on the horizon, it will continue, and let's see where that one falls next year. Not every game has to be dark, doom and gloom. Sometimes you can have a bit of a nice colourful one, and that's exactly what ASTRONEER is. Surviving by getting enough oxygen every time you explore a planet, gathering resources to make the jump to the next one, and hopefully that last jump home. It's filled with automation, filled with base building and all sorts of crazy technology. You've got buggies that you can ride around in, jetpacks they've recently added. This game has received a bunch of updates since its launch. Consoles have received them a little bit slower sometimes, but the developers have done their best to keep players in the loop, and ASTRONEER is definitely one of the best supported survival games out there in the last couple of years. It's now got proper multiplayer support. You can even go ahead and get your own server on it, a more chilled survival experience. Survival mechanics in a game called Survivalists are pretty big, as you would expect. You've got to manage your food, your water, and obviously go around a procedurally generated world, trying to build your bases up and defend them against mobs that will be incoming. It's a fun little compromise on the survival simulation genre. Sadly, the controls and UI do let this game down a little bit. It becomes a little bit tiresome, but they are trying. This game's had a bunch of updates since it's come out. It's got all sorts of things growing for it in terms of farming, pets, and the ability to train your monkeys to go and gather resources for you is big in the game. Once you understand that process, that it's not strictly just a small survival game, but it's more automation as well, you'll get the most out of this. It might seem a bit cheap and easy just to include pretty much any zombie game in a list of survival games. A lot of people associate zombies with survival, and I can see why. A lot of these games are set in post-apocalyptic states, and that's another thing that survival games are associated with. But beyond that, I think that Dying Light does offer that survival element where you've got the zombies chasing you, nighttime becomes a real terror to explore, and it's got all the crafting options as well. It's going to be interesting to see how much of that is transferred over to the sequel that's due out later on this year. I would say on console it's had a bunch of support over the years, and that elevates it as well beyond games like Days Gone, where it really has gone the extra mile in making sure that their player base has got new content every few months, some new thing added, new game mode, new updates, as well as paid DLC to keep ardent fans happy. So because I left it so long, a couple of other games did launch in the time that I finished off the first and second parts of this video, so I have cheated a little bit and I've put 2 games made by the same developer as a 1 slot. The Flame in the Flood and Drake Hollow, both made by the Molasses game company. Great games. Both made years apart, and you can really see the difference and changes with the development team. The Flame in the Dark is a much more roguelike game. It's hard as nails and it still has some issues with UI, but as you explore the rivers you come across islands where you get more resources and hopefully build yourself up to last as long as you possibly can. It's showing its age a little bit now, and then the follow-up Drake Hollow was a great, nice, breezy adaptation of a tower defense game where you have to protect your little drakelings from attack from these Stranger Thing creatures, all the while exploring different procedurally generated open worlds. It was somewhat limited when it launched in terms of combat and real depth, but they've added to that over the last year, adding a bunch of stuff, keeping the game updated, and the latest one adds XP and a whole lot more to really flesh the game out. Definitely something I want to get back into. Both games do suffer a little bit still from content drops, maybe not having enough variety in terms of what you can do, but equally they are both still fantastic survival games. Especially The Flame in the Flood, it's a really difficult one for the really hardcore survival fans out there. A very late entry into this video, Tribes in Midgard is a compelling survival RPG focused co-op game. You and up to 10 friends running around, gathering resources, building up armors and weapons and taking on these giant Jotun while you're all protecting your tree of life from hellfin creatures that come and attack every single night. That's what makes up the bulk of the survival content. You don't necessarily need food or water to keep yourself alive, although obviously it does replenish your health. It's more about the base defenses and keeping that tree safe from harm. In fact, they've done a lot to help with the grind that you find in other survival games. One hit gets you that resource instead of grinding away needlessly, and it's fairly easy to get yourself some decent weapons. They've got a variety of different modes, and it is a live service game. They're promising content and updates for the next year to come, with it coming every sort of 2 months. It's a shame it's not on Xbox yet, but it does look like it's only a timed exclusive, so expect it to launch on the Xbox consoles in maybe a year's time. DECAY 2 and its predecessor, which got remastered for the Xbox One, is a fairly decent suggestion for a survival game. Some might argue it veers on the kind of simulation more because of the way that you have to take care of survivors in your communities and settlements. I think this offers a really good, unique take on the survival genre. While it had lots of criticism when it came out at launch, it's had a bunch of updates since then and continuously adding and refining the gameplay. I'm pretty excited by the 3rd version of the game. It might be the one that really sucks me in, as I haven't really spent as much time in this series as maybe some of the others. Open world, co-op action, absolutely give this a try if you want to have some fun adventures with friends. So many survival games are pretty janky, so many of them had problems with updates, launches and just all sorts of issues with the developers. And I don't think any game has had as many update issues as 7 Days to Die. Separating them issues and taking a cold look at what the game offers right now and whether or not it's a decent survival game is pretty tough, so I'll do my best to balance it in this little short bit. 7 Days to Die is a horde-based defense game where you will need food, water, worry about temperature, weather effects and ailments as you survive, yes, every 7 days against mega hordes of zombies. You'll also encounter all sorts of other zombie creatures while looking for wildlife, exploring and looting houses, towns and the countryside. It started off as a voxel based style game before fleshing it out and making it much more sandboxy. You can build huge bases, contraptions, defences, and overall it is definitely one of the best survival games when you list them features and when you get a chance to play it with no problems. The PC version has spent 8 years in early access and is nowhere near close to still being finished, and it's had umpteenth updates while console have waited 4 years for a meaningful update. I've covered this saga every step of the way, and the latest is that Xbox and PlayStation on current consoles will never receive any more updates for this game. The best you can hope for is to buy a new version of the game on the next series of consoles once the PC version is done. That's a fact, that's what the developers have iterated time and time again. I put this up pretty high last year. I was trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, but no, I cannot put this in the top 10. You could argue it shouldn't be even in the top 30 based on what I've just said to you. Definitely in need of some sort of resolution that provides closure for a lot of fans that have stuck with it. It's got more players playing it on console than PC at times over the years, and a huge passionate crowd of fans that still would love to see some sort of update, even if it was just bug fixing. The one thing I'm hoping for now is that Funpimps will do the right thing, and when it comes out on the next gen consoles, they'll offer some sort of discount or upgrade for everyone that owns it on the current gen. 7 Days to Die is a great survival game on PC. On console, it's still just a bit of a hot mess. Genuinely, when I thought about doing this list, I waited until Rust came to console, because I honestly thought it might be able to dislodge some of the biggest and best survival games out there. It would make a dent, and I'd be putting it in the top 5 for sure. What an absolute wrong'un I am. Rust on console is an absolute cluster truck. No content, still no sign of the community features that so many players want, even though it's still going to cost them a lot more money, like community servers, like skin stores. It still runs like absolute arse on older gen consoles, with only the PS5 and Xbox Series X and S consoles particularly showing some sort of promise that this game will actually become good. Official numbers are already dropping. It is absolutely my worst fears. It's DAYZ all over again. That game also launched to an absolute shit show. Horrible UI, horrible controls, and really just wasn't very good. But over time, DAYZ did improve, and it's at the point now where it's a lot more stable, and it is getting content, albeit not that much. Can Rust mount a comeback? I really hope so. I envisioned this taking over as being my #1 game on my channel, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't simply sit by and watch Double 11 rinse this cash cow. Despite its issues and problems, there's still no game like it. That's why I'm so saddened and why I'm frankly still pissed off about it. I want this game to succeed so much. D11 have had 3 years to cherry pick the best of the Rust content, 3 years to get this console port up to scratch, and it just is unbearably bad. If you do own next gen consoles, you'll be wondering about the complaints, but for sure, try it on an OG Xbox One and you'll talk about 20 FPS if you're lucky. So yeah, I grudgingly put it in my top 20. I'm just hoping it does improve, and who knows, maybe they could turn it around and appear somewhere in my top 5. Fighting off sharks is always going to be pretty harrowing, and obviously Stranded Deep takes that up a notch as you build your rafts, go around from island to island, procedure generated world, trying to get the components to make your escape. It's a fun game, it's got some really good decent survival mechanics to it, although there are a few things that hold it back. There's some decisions about the survival stuff that I'm a bit baffled by. Base building isn't really necessary as much as you would think. You don't really need it other than decorative purposes. No spoilers, but the ending also is a bit unsatisfactory. I find this game slightly boring on my own, but good news, they're adding multiplayer at last. It's in the last stages before hitting Xbox, PlayStation, and hopefully it will come to the Switch version in a while too. Cheap as chips normally, definitely recommended if you want to play a new one with some pals. There's lots of bosses to fight, and yeah, as I said, they still haven't actually technically finished the game. It is on its last few stretches on PC in early access. One of the few space survival games that just about gets it right, BREATHEDGE is a simulation survival game where you will be floating around in all sorts of crazy ways, trying to get enough technology, resources and tools to get you through a big chunky story. There's survival mode, there's sandbox mode. It's got a lot going for it. This early access title was in years on PC. It came to consoles recently, and I would say it's a fairly decent game. The survival elements are pretty heavy. You need oxygen, you need food, you need water. Dangers in terms of enemies don't really become apparent until a bit later on in the game, but it's definitely a bit of a slog getting there. And obviously, yeah, lots of survival focus. It's a pretty little game as well, and it runs pretty decently on console, even on Nintendo Switch. It's also got more content coming, by the looks of things, 3 chapters and extra game modes on its way too, so the future's good for this one. DAYZ placed higher than Rust. What crack are you on, Jade? Well, don't forget this is the console version of the rundown. I've got lots of problems with DAYZ, especially over the years, the way the console updates have hit, and the game is just not really made or tailored especially well in terms of UI and controls. But there's no doubt about it, DAYZ over the last year and a half has supported their game a lot better than some of their other rivals. PC updates have hit on consoles on day one. There isn't a huge gap in content, there isn't a huge amount of stuff that's missing other than maybe mod support. There's a hell of a lot of content still left over from their standalone days, which so many DayZ fans kind of hold Bohemia to, with good reason, because it was kind of promised that a lot of that content would come. Instead, they drip fed new guns in the last year, they shortened their dev team and pretty much didn't make it the focus, as they've done many times over the years. But very recently they added contaminated zones to the game, and I've got high hopes that yes, maybe DayZ is worth visiting again. As an experience, it's absolutely one of the bigger survival based games. You've got to eat, you've got to drink, you've got to worry about infections, and of course, yes, zombies. So yes, it scores highly in the survival category. If it ever gets to the point where it redoes the UI or does the control scheme a bit better, or we do see significant big chunky updates hitting again and a lot better performance, I'll absolutely put this a bit higher in future. Conan Exiles Fall from Grace has been pretty mighty. I was voting this as one of the better survival games in last year's video, even beating Ark Survival Evolved, simply because the developers had been on a roll ever since its release, adding fresh new content for free and then adding all paid DLCs that gave you the option to add new building options, as well as armour and weapon skins alongside it, but the bulk of the content was free. New dungeons, new ways to play, new enemies, new missions, new quests. They went quiet for a while and then we heard the mumblings of ODEYSSEY. In fact, I leaked it first about what was going to be going on, and it took a long time to arrive on console. 8 months after the PC launch. At no point did Funcom really give any expectation that consoles wouldn't receive it. It was such a shock because they'd done so well in releasing content pretty much the same time for all their platforms. Turns out ODEYSSEY wasn't the jewel in the crown that they maybe had hoped. Players have found it pretty repetitive and boring already, and it hasn't captured the imagination as much as they'd think. It was probably a mistake to launch it in early access and take so long. Although they got feedback from fans and definitely improved it, I still think it just made the hype and excitement all that much worse. They also went like 8 months without any proper updates for Xbox or PlayStation, leaving it in a pretty poor state, blaming it on COVID, which is a fair thing to say, but so many of their rivals, even smaller companies, had managed to update the game, keep on top of things. If you picked up Conan today though, what would it offer? Quests, a hardcore survival experience, lots of combat, trying to beat Dark Souls, maybe not necessarily getting there, but it's definitely more advanced than any of the other survival games I could probably mention. If you love the grind, you love crafting, you've got it made in Conan. Hundreds of different ways that you have to grind up materials, refine them into others, and use a whole plethora of different benches to make the armours and weapons succeed. And of course, you've got the thralls, as well as pets and creatures that you can bend to your will. Let's hope they do carry on supporting it a little bit longer, as I do think June's still at least 18 months away, and hopefully Conan can rise to the top again. But for now, yeah, it's got a much worse position, because although they've got back on track a little bit with bug fixes, and they've finally added the ability to transfer your single player characters to other worlds, I still think Conan might be one of them ones that gets drip fed content, barely clinging on until we get a big announcement about their next game. It also doesn't help that on console with every update you have to re-download the whole friggin' thing, and there's still a multitude of issues that players are still having. But if you can get past the bugs, get past the optimization, then you will have a fun experience doing all the missions, completing all the feats, and getting your character to OP Conan Barbarian status. The game is also filled with a litany of nice building pieces to make all sorts of crazy creations, so it's definitely one of its strong points if you like building too. When I first loaded up Ark Survival Evolved and I got chumped on by my first raptor, I thought, wow, this game is hard. As you progress in Ark, it becomes easier and easier. With each update and each DLC, the game gets even easier, so that by the end, on Genesis 2, the latest paid expansion, you start off the game with endgame armour. That's pretty much the trajectory for Ark Survival Evolved. A great concept, great idea, and still a fantastic survival game, even on console with all the problems and issues I'm about to list. With something like 10 maps to explore, you'll have thousands of hours pretty much playing a Pokemon dinosaur themed game. But once you get the hang of them early survival elements of food and water, the game doesn't get as hard as you would think it does, and you kind of learn the ropes quickly. You've got various different ways to get resources. It's still got some of the best base building in any game that I've played. I really love the creativity of that aspect, and the biomes and maps are gorgeous and some of the best looking normally. Ark made my channel in the beginning, but I've always been critical because the development team have just had some really shocking decisions over the years. They don't seem to have any sort of console Q&A. Each and every update, DLC, season pass that gets added is broken, buggy, and takes months and months to fix. It's an absolute meme how always late they are, how many delays they'll always talk about. The higher ups at Wildcard absolutely put hype above substance, really not caring how the game performs on consoles one iota. Even simple event updates that are meant to give us some free skins and some increased rates often break the game on console for weeks on end. Yes, they have supported the game with free maps each and every year pretty much, as well as paid expansions, and they have updated the game with quality of life revamps every now and then, but nowhere near as much as you would actually think. Each and every DLC that comes out is paid to win. It always gives you an advantage on the official servers against other players that don't have it. And their treatment of the Nintendo Switch, releasing the console version of the game and then not doing a single update in 3 years. That's why I've put it so low in terms of support. Now of course that's my opinion about stuff. I've covered the game since almost its inception and it helped break my channel into what it is today. But I appreciate that a lot of other people simply don't care about a bunch of that stuff. What they just really love is being able to survive, grabbing that army of dinosaurs, breeding, getting mutations, building fantastic creations and taking on the many challenges that all the different maps offer. It's buggy, it's poor, it's missing a PS5 upgrade that they said would come and yet 8 months later nowhere in sight. And it looks likely that the next version, Ark 2, will be an Xbox and PC exclusive, but that's still not stopping the Ark phenomenon from existing. People absolutely love this game. I may not appreciate it as much as I once did, but I know for sure it's still one of the most solid survival game experiences on console. So remember I said that lots of these games will have the same amount of points, but it's all just about my personal preference, what I've been enjoying playing in the last year, and Grounded is definitely one of them games that's going to be more personal. It's got the same points as Ark, same points as Conan, but I still prefer playing this at the moment. And I think that's a big deal for a game that's still in early access and still got another year and a bit still probably of development. Grounded has you running around just like you were in the movie Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, as you explore a huge backyard, fighting off bugs, insects and trying to find all sorts of science points to get upgrades and unlocks to build bases, new armours, new weapons and explore the story and the missions that are in the game. They've just added their recent big boss and there's another new update on its way. They've also revamped building, adding a new tile set which has really give a little bit more creativity to the game as well. I'm so looking forward to where this game's going to go. One of the biggest months I've ever had on my channel, giving me the most amount of subs, the most amount of views in one single month. Grounded I have a lot to thank for, but I still actually just love the game. It's got a gentleness to it, but it's still pretty hard at times. The game can be pretty tough. It's got all the typical survival mechanics you come to expect, with different game modes though to make it a bit easier or harder, and of course creative. The updates have changed though slightly, now they're every 3 months, but are hopefully offering more chunky content rather than every month only being small. Much like Conan, it can suddenly start getting a bit repetitive once you've explored fully the backyard, but with more biomes going to be added in the next year, and I'm guessing even more creatures and new ways to play. I can't wait to see the future of Grounded, and that's why it's above some of the games that maybe a lot of you guys would be surprised by. I'm still pretty confident that when the game is finished, it will go even higher up the list. You may be thinking I'm pretty critical of some of these games in this list, but when you compare their development to one of the most maligned games in gaming history, No Man's Sky, then you kind of see where I'm coming from. The launch was filled with lies, none of the content that so many people were expecting, and it took a good little while for them to get right and back again. But they did come back again, with update after update over the last 5 years, free content that dwarfs so much more than they originally promised and makes good on all the issues they once had. It's still up in the air whether or not it's a great survival game. I know it's still an acquired taste, but for me it's definitely worthy of a place in the top 10, above some of the bigger games that maybe you'd come to expect, because of that very reason, the support it's received, the different varieties of ways that you can play, exploring, base building or even brand new settlement of a spaceport. It's a big part of the reason I rate it so highly, the versatility of this game, where you can mix it up and do what you want in terms of either exploring planets, finding out lore, completing missions, base building, or just simply flying through space. It's a testament that other games that I've criticised for not having enough updates, not doing enough, can turn it around if they really want to, and all of the No Man's Sky stuff has come for free, not a single microtransaction or paid DLC. You technically only need Oxygen, and it's not particularly hard to get hold of, but I still rate it as one of the bigger and better survival games out there. Give it a shot if you haven't already tried it. Don't listen to all the hate and negativity around it. At least find out for yourself whether or not it's your cup of space, Joe. Terraria is about to receive its final console content update. The 1.4 Journey's End offers new bosses, new ways to play, adding a easier mode or almost a sandbox mode, and an even more difficult mode to play. Loads of additions, loads of great stuff that console fans have been waiting over a year for, ever since it was released on PC, and a year before that when it was first announced. Simply put, Terraria is in my top 3 of games all time. The reason it's not as high in this list is because the survival elements are kind of light. You don't technically need food and water to survive, nor any kind of oxygen, but you do have to defend your base. You get attacked periodically by groups of zombies and other mobs and creatures, and it's really challenging. All the crafting that you've got in the game, all the exploration, I really do think it still deserves a place in a survival list. It has lost a few points because of the slow nature of updates. This is like the 3rd time that console players have had to wait more than a year for a single update. In fact, before this it was 2 years for an update that kept it on parity with the PC versions. But judging it on what it's going to have in the next couple of weeks, it is the complete game, the complete picture. The only thing they're going to be adding hopefully in the future is crossplay, and Switch will be following up hopefully in the near future too. I can't wait. Don't dismiss this as a kids game, it's rock hard and one of the best ones out. The Don't Starve series blends that mix of roguelike and survival like no others, and so many have tried to recreate. It is one of the first survival games I ever played, long before Art Survival evolved, and it definitely holds a place because of that. Hard as nails, you can make it a bit easier in the settings, but it's a tough mix of running around, gathering resources, keeping your food, your water and your sanity levels high as you explore an increasingly difficult world. The sequel, Don't Starve Together, offered multiplayer components, and they've got a bunch of DLC characters that have come out over the years that you can pay money for, as well as a bunch of free updates, including the latest where you have to survive under the boughs of a tree. Great game, definitely deservedly placed in top 10. With the way I've done the point system, games that obviously have a bit more difficulty in them and really do rely on all elements of survival, keeping yourself hydrated, food, making sure temperature is okay, and not being attacked every 2 minutes by creatures is really going to mean you're going to get a higher score. That's why GREENHELL has got one of the highest out of the list. As we get to the top 5, of course, lots of these games are going to have high survival scores. Not just that though, but GREENHELL's gameplay is pretty solid too. It's got a decent story in it that makes you want to explore further, and if you're not down for that, you can endlessly survive in sandbox modes too. While I still think it's not as pretty looking as some of the other games, even on PC, it's still got a charm and a look about it and a feel that no other game really matches. With updates still to come as well, offering the same content that PC has, it's still looking good for Xbox and PlayStation, and it's available on Switch as well, again a plus point for many. With the Spirits of Amazonia content drop still to come, the future's looking good for GREENHELL. I guess the only thing that really holds it back is the control system is still just a bit over convoluted and probably still not built as good as it could be for consoles. And it did take an awful long time for it to arrive on console, despite many release dates before it. But it is a solid survival game and absolutely deservedly in the top 5. Pretty much like the rest of the games that I've put together, Subnautica and its sequel Below Zero are very close to each other in terms of what they offer. Survival in an underwater world, facing off against giant leviathans as you get technology to explore, uncover story and hopefully make your escape or find the answers to mysteries. The first Subnautica had a protracted development and eventually made its way to consoles. It's had performance issues, and that's why it's not maybe rated as highly as it probably could be. But absolutely, the story, even in the first one where it's a little bit more ambiguous, is definitely worthy of your attention. Below Zero adds a lot more of that story content, and some people say it's maybe not as good, but I quite like the focus. I don't necessarily need a survival game with hundreds of hours of content. Just give me a solid experience where I get my jump scares through these magnificent creatures that you find, all the while trying to build up bases and find unique technology to travel through. If only they had added one of of the most requested features from the first game, which was multiplayer, I think this would absolutely probably be in the top 3 survival games. It's not as hardcore as some of the other games in this list, but for sure it can be really challenging and really tough. But it's a beautiful game. I love the vibe. I've always loved the atmosphere. If I had to choose which was the better game out of the two, I would actually say Below Zero. I preferred the more focused look of it, and if I'd never played the first one, the jump scares and stuff would still be all unique to me, and I like the guided approach. As said, it does lose a few points because of the performance issues and some of them requests that just weren't met. It does look like it's the end of the road for a good long while. Their next game is going to be some sort of RTS game, but absolutely you must play or try this game or series if you've never tried it and love survival. It's pretty ridiculous that 2 years ago when I did this list, I didn't include Minecraft or Terraria. I decided that they were sandbox games, no longer really proper survival. And especially in the case of Minecraft, I did it dirty. Of course it's still a survival game. You do need food to stay alive. But over the years, a lot of focus had been on other aspects of the game, and it transformed into something completely different in various different cases. But over the last couple of years, adding more biomes, adding more features to the game, it started to feel more and more like a survival game once again. So of course, it's deserved of a place in the top 3. It's one of the godfathers of survival. It absolutely popularised survival again, from being something that was just a bit obscure in the 80s and 90s to something absolutely amazing in the late 2000s, early 2010s. I shouldn't really need to explain any further what Minecraft is. What we can delve into is the support it's received in consoles. Over the last few years, they've only had one major update per year and maybe a small quality of life fixes in between that time. They have opened up experimental servers on consoles now as well, particularly the Xbox, where you can access some of this stuff like the snapshots, and you get a chance to taste what's to come a little bit earlier. So in terms of support, of course it's got it. These big updates add a whole lot to the game usually, offering brand new biomes, new ways to explore, and new items or creatures to face. I guess what really stops Minecraft from being number 1 is that level of survival. Once you get the basics of learning that you need some food, that's pretty much it, you're set. It's never hard to find food, you don't need water, and there's not many other components. You do get the zombies come and attack you occasionally if you're in your base, but soon as you realise you can put lights out everywhere, so that's why it only gets an average survival score. It'd receive even more points for support if it didn't charge so much for the packs that you can buy. Your kids are probably used to it by now, with all the Fortnite and all the other MTX that we've all had to face over the last few years in the gaming industry. It's commonplace now, maybe not such a big deal, but it still rankles with me that Minecraft was such a free-giving game, and with all the mod support on PC, we kind of hoped that would maybe transfer to consoles one day. And it has, but of course not without absolutely making a ton of money for Microsoft. They do at least pay some of the creators that put their creations on their stores, but again, maybe not as enough as maybe they should. A few minor negatives, but undoubtedly this game has kickstarted a whole generation of survival. Every single game you've seen in this list has taken some sort of inspiration from Minecraft over the years, either implementing it heavily or just lightly. It's got its fingers deep into the history of survival, and it will continue to do so for the next 10 years at least. Bottom line, Minecraft is still just fun to play. You still lose hours. That's why they called it Minecraft, and that's why it's in my top 3. Last year I put The Long Dark as like number 10 in my list, when I re-examined survival genre on consoles and how they perform, the kind of updates they receive, and the gameplay itself, how good it is, and of course the survival mechanics, how important it is to the enjoyment of the game. You have to put The Long Dark higher. It has had issues with its content, but not the survival parts at least anyway. It's a sandbox game with a separate story mode that's been delivered in episodes. These episodes have taken far too long to get done, and it's probably the one thing that's been holding The Long Dark from greatness. Ever since it launched a good few years ago now, they've been releasing usually one episode a year, and it's still not finished. So some people would have never enjoyed the story of The Long Dark. It's always just been about the sandbox survival that was mostly been in the game since its inception in 2014. And that's where the strength of this game lies. It's one of the toughest survival games you will play. The pure mechanics of having to make sure you've got enough food, water, and keeping yourself warm against the cold, and of course from the dangers of the wildlife. No zombies in this game, but plenty of reasons that you should be running. It takes dedication, preparation before you go and explore. Even the smallest of adventures can suddenly turn bad. Alongside their long-awaited episode updates, they have been frequently updating the sandbox, adding new items, changing and adjusting the way that you play this game, until honestly it is deserved of them top 5 survival points. The gameplay is solid as well, albeit I still find the controls ever so slightly fiddly. That said, you'll never get any greater accomplishment than completing a run in the sandbox mode, or adventuring and setting yourself some of the many challenges that the game also offers. If they can just get the final episodes done for this game, it might even end up being number 1 next time. Here we are, the final one. Yep, it's the forest again. I really nearly did put The Long Dark or Minecraft as number 1, but in the end, when I really thought about survival, what it means to survive in a game, you've got it all in the forest. You've got to make sure you've got food, you've got hydration, you've got to make sure that you've got protection in your base, and you will be encountering a whole variety of different types of biomes and creatures, more importantly. And that's what really brings this game to life. It's the fight, the survival against the creatures. If you're not building your bases in the right way or constantly keeping things on the go, you are going to get overwhelmed by the mutants of the forest. I really can't stand horror games. I'm not a big fan of jump scares, so it's surprising that it's still one of my favourite. That's because I can appreciate the story, the elements of where you explore. It isn't the world's biggest game, like you can get through this in a number of hours once you get competent at it, and there are complaints that it doesn't have enough content. What do you people want? For the price of it is on Steam and a cheap price on PS4, it offered a compact survival story. It gave you incidental storytelling that made you compelled to go and look for more clues and hopefully find the final answer to what's been going on this island and where your son is. They spent a stupidly long time in early access, but once it was out they even offered a free update adding new mechanics as well as new dangers. If it was only available on other platforms like Xbox, and yes, maybe possibly did have a few more quality of life updates, it would get the perfect score. But even up against PC games, I'm still probably going to vote this as the number 1 survival game of all time. Until the sequel comes out, that is. And hopefully it makes an appearance on an Xbox. And there we go. Agree, disagree, put your top 3 survival games in the comments down below. Heck, put your top 5 or top 10 if you really want to. Over the next few months, I am going to let you guys decide. I'm starting up a brand new series where you'll get to vote on my community page each and every week, and there'll be a video to go along with it. I'm going to focus on survival stories. I'm going to focus on the enemies and creatures in games. We're going to focus on the multiplayer, the PvP, the base building. I want you guys to help me decide definitively out of each of these categories what game does what best. Always, just one person's opinion. You don't have to agree, you don't have to disagree, but do leave a like. Make sure you subscribe for the home of survival games. I'll see you at Bags for, I guess, next year's one too.